You are quite honestly inferior, mentally, physically. In fact, I am surprised how little improvement there has been in human evolution. Oh, there has been technical advancement, but how little man himself has changed.
Over their history, both Starfleet and the Federation have had a complicated relationship with genetic engineering. Let's have a look at 5 episodes that examine that relationship in more detail. It makes sense for us to start where it all began, in the original series, with Khan Noonien Singh. Space Seed, the 23rd episode of the first season of the original series, begins with the Enterprise's discovery of an Earth vessel from the 1990s, adrift in an abandoned region of space. Dr. McCoy picks up life signs, but the heartbeats are too slow to be human, and Spock's sensors detect equipment at work on board the vessel. The Enterprise goes into red alert, imagining that hostile aliens may have taken control of the ancient vessel, but despite what their sensors are reading, the ship doesn't seem to acknowledge their presence. Stranger yet, the ship appears to be called the Botany Bay, the same name as the penal colony in Australia, but there's no record of such a vessel in the computer's history files. Eventually, the captain beams over with an away team, and they discover dozens of stasis chambers with human beings on board. It turns out that the ship is automated, and this crew has been asleep for over 200 years. The away team's presence on the ship triggers a mechanism that is programmed to awaken the leader of the sleeper vessel. Dr. McCoy beams back to sickbay with his new patient, and from the start, he is amazed at the man's physical and recuperative powers. It takes them some time, however, to learn that the man on Enterprise's sickbay is no other than Khan Noonien Singh, the most prominent genetically engineered Caesar of the Eugenics War.
Name? Khan Noonien Singh.
From 1992 through 1996, absolute ruler of more than a quarter of your world.
In the Star Trek timeline, the Eugenics War was Earth's Third World War. It took place at the tail end of the 20th century, in the 1990s, and was precipitated by humanity's attempt to better themselves with genetic engineering and selective breeding. They did not anticipate, however, that with a superior intellect and superior physical skills, superior ambition was sure to follow. It was an era of Napoleons, some of whom, upon the defeat of the Superman, were never found. As it turns out, some of them escaped in a space vessel, only to be awakened by the crew of the Enterprise. In the words of Mr. Spock, Khan was the most dangerous adversary the Enterprise ever faced. He is physically and mentally superior to any individual on board, and he isn't shy about voicing his disappointment that in 2 centuries humans have given up on bettering themselves. He awakens the other augments and takes control of the Enterprise, cutting the oxygen supply to the bridge, and for once, the ingenuity of the crew is not sufficient to turn things around and save the day. Space Seed is one of the most important episodes of the original series. It featured one of only 2 characters to face Kirk more than once, the other one being Harry Mudd, and it launched the basis for one of the most beloved movies in the franchise, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. It also introduced the concept of the Eugenics War into Star Trek lore. From this first episode, we learn that humans played with genetic engineering at some point in the past, but they have given up those practices. We get a sense that there is a consensus among 23rd century individuals that attempting to improve the species by those means was a bad idea. Still, perhaps because he is a relic of a time gone by, or because Kirk nurtures a certain admiration for the man, Khan is given the opportunity to settle an inhospitable planet with his augments, to be a ruler in hell, as he puts it. This choice on the captain's part would plant the seeds for his return, and pave the way towards him hurting Kirk and the Enterprise in the worst possible way.
I have been, and always shall be, your friend.
The problem, however, didn't end with Khan. For starters, not all scientists were prepared to say goodbye to genetic engineering. Long before he started his work in cybernetics, Dr. Arik Sung, a forebearer of Data's father, was a geneticist, intent on reigniting Earth's augment program, fueled by a belief that proper parenting and nurturing of the augments would eliminate the dictatorial tendencies that plagued their 1990s counterparts. He was mistaken, of course. And a good thing too, otherwise we may not have had Data. But he wasn't the only one who wasn't prepared to give up on this controversial branch of genetics.
Our ancestors came from Earth to create a perfect society. They believed that through controlled procreation, they could create people without flaws.
In 2368, during a routine scientific mission tracking a stellar core fragment, the Enterprise D discovered a hidden human colony in the distant world of Moab 4. When they finally managed to establish contact, because the colony appeared to ignore their hails at first, the The Enterprise discovered that those people were the descendants of a group of scientists who emigrated from Earth at some point in the 22nd century with the express purpose of creating paradise. Moab 4 is an engineered society, genetically engineered that is, and part of that design involved complete isolation from all other human beings to avoid the problem of external influences poisoning that perfect design. There's a problem though. When the stellar core fragment passes by, it will generate tremors that may obliterate the colony. Because of that threat, Aaron Connor, their leader, allows a small delegation from the Enterprise to beam down to the planet, and in time, a team of engineers as well, to modify the biosphere according to a plan hatched by Geordi and Hannah Bates, the planet's lead scientist. In the meantime, we learn more about the people of this world, especially through Diana, who is fascinated by the very concept of it and becomes especially close to Aaron. The founders of the colony believed they could create people without flaws. Part of that meant eliminating disease and disability. Geordi's visor comes as quite a shock, because no one in that society could ever be blind. But the founders went beyond that. Every person in Moab 4 is bred to be exactly what they would wish to become. There are no bad poets there, nor are there poets toiling in obscurity never to be discovered. People were born with the qualities and desires best suited for the role they are meant to fulfill. To them, an ideal existence. In all honesty, the genetics of this episode is a bit shaky. I don't even know what they mean when they say they are in a genetic balance with their environment. But that's okay, because understanding how the founders created this society is not the point. The point of the story is the question. If we were to become capable of manipulating the genome to this extent, would such a society indeed be perfect? The cracks start to show early on. When the away team first beams down, everyone on the surface is astounded. They have no concept of transporter technology. Later, when they develop a way to strengthen the biosphere, the technology to do that comes from Geordi's visor, a device created for a blind man who never would have existed in their world. Hannah Bates, the lead scientist, is strongly impacted by this. She realizes that because their society is so perfect, they haven't had a real challenge in over 100 years, and their science has stagnated as a result. If you read through the backstage notes about this episode on Memory Alpha, you'll see that almost everyone involved was displeased with how the episode turned out. I, on the other hand, quite like it. You see, in Space Seed, we are introduced to the first threat presented by genetic engineering. That the Superman that emerged from the experiment would want to rule over everyone else. The Masterpiece Society presents an entirely different threat. What if the same thing that eliminates our difficulties also takes away our ingenuity? More deeply than that, what if to make a perfect human, you have to strip them of their humanity? The stellar core fragment was not the main threat to the stability of the colony. After the threat has been dealt with, Hannah Bates decides that she wants to leave. She is not the only one. Others are willing to join her, but their society is genetically integrated. Departure of so many could mean the demise of their way of life, and the Enterprise crew must waive their duty not to interfere with the affairs of other civilizations with their responsibility to accede to the request for asylum of human beings with free will.
Do you understand what it would do to the colony?
I understand that these are human beings, Counselor, with free will.
The challenge is compounded by the fact that in the short time that they spend together, Diana and Aaron become romantically involved. For the first time, he is dealing with something his genetic background has not prepared him for, because although he is the leader of the colony, bound to ensure their survival, he also knows that if he beams away to the Enterprise, Diana will be waiting for him there. There's a wonderful scene in the turbo lift, when Diana comes clean to the captain about her involvement with Aaron. She is embarrassed about it, but she wants him to know, and she's recriminating herself for allowing this to even happen. Usually, in their interactions, Picard is the one in distress and she is in control, but this time the roles are reversed. Diana's heart is in turmoil, and Picard comforts her. It's a beautiful small moment, and gives the captain a chance to voice one of the takeaways from their interaction with the colonists.
Genetic manipulation or not, nobody's perfect.
Aside from rebellious geneticists and human colonies that severed relations with Earth, after the Eugenics War, humans live under severe laws against genetic engineering. Laws that were passed on to the Federation and were intended to serve as a firewall to prevent the threat of another Khan Noonien Singh. Outlawing genetic engineering, however, did not neatly solve the problem. Genetics, after all, is not about individuals. It's about families, and the augments that attempted to take over the world in the 1990s had descendants. One of these descendants is the security officer of the Enterprise under Captain Pike in the 23rd century, Khan Noonien Singh. Khan carries the augmentations of her infamous ancestor, and because of that, she was relentlessly bullied as a child. The word augment was a slur, uttered against her by other children. Worse than that, Khan fears herself. She fears that within her genes resides the seed of something evil. This fear makes her hate herself at times, and locks her in a perpetual internal conflict. It nearly led to the end of her relationship with her best friend, Riley, the officer who sponsored Khan's entrance into Starfleet. An officer who, unbeknownst to Khan, was also genetically enhanced. Una, the original number 1, is an Illyrian. Initially, I thought this was a contribution of Strange New Worlds, but as it turns out, Una's status as a genetically perfect woman, and even her Illyrian origin, was mentioned all the way back in 1989 in Vulcan's Glory, a novel by Star Trek legend D.C. Fontana. Strange New Worlds simply made it canon. For Illyrians, genetic modification is part of their heritage. It is a practice passed on through family lines, not only as a means of self-defense, but as a way of transmitting culture. It is even how they explore space. Illyrians don't terraform worlds. Instead, they bioform themselves, adjusting to the new environments which they encounter. Una grew up in a Federation colony. Through her, we learned that by the 23rd century, fear of the genetically enhanced had morphed into prejudice. The draconian laws that banished genetic engineering also seemed to give people license to behave according to their worst instincts. In the colony where Una grew up, Illyrians were persecuted. They feared for their lives. She saw it happen to another child when she was young. The ostracism he suffered when his genetic status was discovered. Una's family could pass as humans, so they pretended they were, and in one occasion she almost died of a broken leg because they couldn't take her to a doctor out of fear that her genetic status would be discovered. Despite such a bleak upbringing, however, Una decided to join Starfleet. She saw a Starfleet crew in a colony once. So many people, from so many different worlds, all working together. She believed in that ideal, believed that Starfleet would be the gateway through which Illyrians would finally be accepted into the Federation. We first learn about Una's status in the 3rd episode of Strange New Worlds, Ghosts of Ilyria. An unknown contagion is brought aboard the ship, a pathogen that spreads through light. Una's modified immune system is able to fight off the infection, and when the situation becomes dire, she decides to reveal her condition to Dr. Mbenga so that perhaps he could synthesize an antibody that would help the rest of the crew. All the while that was happening, Captain Pike and Spock were trapped down planetside, trying to take over from a storm, and incidentally learning what happened with a group of Illyrians that attempted to reverse their genetic modifications just so they would be admitted into the Federation. The conclusion of the episode is beautiful. Una comes clear to her captain, and Pike decides to keep her secret at the risk of his position in Starfleet. Una is grateful, but also conflicted. Knowing Pike, I believe he did what he did out of friendship, masking it as a reward for Una's heroic role in saving the crew. At the end of that day, however, Una is questioning that, questioning when it will be enough to simply be an Illyrian. It's a bittersweet moment that mirrors many more familiar 20th century concerns. The question of what would happen when Starfleet became aware of Commander Chin Riley's status, however, would remain open until the 2nd season, when Una was arrested and tried for hiding her genetic status to gain entrance into Starfleet. It is during that trial that she talks about Starfleet's motto, Ad Astra per Aspera, in a speech so memorable that it would continue to inspire cadets to join Starfleet well into the 24th century.
It was a really big reason why I joined. Ad Astra per Aspera.
Strange New Worlds is easily one of my favorite Trek shows. I think the most interesting thing it does here is flip a classic science fiction trope on its head. Science fiction is no stranger to genetically motivated dystopias. Usually, however, the story is about how genetic enhancement makes normal people into the underdogs. Gattaca is perhaps the best known example of a story where individuals without genetic enhancements become an underclass of social outcasts due to their natural birth status. Through Una's, and to a certain extent Khan's eyes, we see that the Federation's ban on genetic engineering created a polar opposite to that. From the 21st century onwards, it is the genetically enhanced who are discriminated against. It doesn't matter that they don't display the same despotic tendencies as the first augments. It doesn't matter that they are from a different culture. It doesn't even matter if they had any say in their condition. Genetically enhanced individuals, humans or otherwise, are forbidden to join Starfleet. They have no status in the Federation, not unlike the invalids of Gattaca. In Star Trek, this is a huge issue. The Federation was built on respect for other cultures, but the laws against genetic engineering have a strength of their own. They keep the Illyrians out, and because of Deep Space Nine, we know that much of these would remain unchanged well into the 24th century.
Then it's true? The word you're looking for is unnatural.
Dr. Bashir, I presume, is an episode that entirely shook Deep Space Nine. I'm a big fan of the Delta Flyers podcast. The guys are currently making their way through Deep Space Nine. Terry and Armin know what's coming, but for Robert Duncan McNeil and Garrett Wang, Tom and Harry from Voyager, it's their first time watching the show. Tom often talks about how Bashir seems to be good at everything and seems to do everything and play every role on the ship, and every time he says something like that, I want to tell him, wait for it, it's going to make sense. Well, this is the episode in which that starts to make sense. While Dr. Bashir and Chief O'Brien are playing dots at Quarks, a familiar voice interrupts them. Familiar to us, that is. Dr. Louis Zimmerman, the engineer who designed Voyager's EMH, is on Deep Space Nine with the goal of developing a new medical hologram, akin to the Voyager Doctor, but this time a long-term program. Starfleet has decided that the human template for the program will be Dr. Bashir. At this point, no one in the Alpha Quadrant knows about how much Voyager's EMH has evolved, and emergency medical holograms are intended to be used temporarily only in emergencies. The long-term holodoctor will be designed to operate as a full-time doctor in places where life support and living space are at a premium, and the primary mission does not require the doctor to leave sickbay. Research outposts, subspace communication stations, long-range exploratory vessels, things like that. Still, the LMH might need to interact with patients for months on end, and that is the whole point of choosing a human template. Mining Dr. Bashir for his life experience, so they can infuse the program with a personality, and hopefully some bedside manner.
Please state the nature of the medical emergency. Oh, that's original.
As part of his research into Julian's character, he summons his parents to Deep Space Nine against Julian's expressed wishes. While they are on the station, mistaking the new hologram for their son, the Bashirs accidentally reveal a critical piece of information about Julian's past. As a child, he was genetically enhanced. It happened when he was 6 years old. In Julian's words, while the other children were learning how to read and write and use the computer, he was still trying to tell a dog from a cat, a tree from a house. This is interesting because it gives us an idea of just how severe the ban on genetic engineering is. We know that there's an exception in the genetic engineering ban for treatments of severe birth defects. What Julian is describing when he talks about his childhood sounds like an intellectual disability at the very least. But that was not enough for him to get treatment, so he didn't rise to the bar of a severe birth defect as specified in Federation law. Of course, Julian's father went a little further than simply seeking treatment. Rather than correcting his son's intellectual deficiency, Richard Bashir took him off-world to Edigion Prime, where he was subjected to accelerated critical neural pathway formation. Over 2 months, Julian's DNA was altered, his IQ jumped 5 points a day, followed by improvements in hand-eye coordination, stamina, vision, reflexes, weight, height, everything became enhanced. He didn't discover what had been done to him until he was 18, and he kept his secret from everyone, because revealing it would mean losing everything he had ever built. He would have been kicked out of Starfleet. He wouldn't even be allowed to practice medicine. Ultimately, Captain Sisko intervenes, and a solution is found that allows Julian to retain his position in Deep Space Nine. His father is sentenced to a prison facility in New Zealand, however, as a punishment for his crime, and Dr. Zimmerman recommends against using Julian as the template for his LMH. This wouldn't be the last time, however, when they would encounter a parent tempted to use genetic engineering to tamper with the DNA of their child. A couple of years later, all the way into the Delta Quadrant, we encounter a genetic defect that is considered severe enough for treatment. Lineage begins with Tom and B'Elanna discovering they are expecting a baby. For a while, it seems like it will be an episode about the two of them getting used to the idea of becoming parents. Them and everyone else on the ship. After all, this is the first baby expected to be born on Voyager since Naomi Wildman, all the way back in Season 1. Soon, however, the doctor diagnoses a spinal defect in the baby. A common issue in Klingon females, as it turns out, and that is how they discover that they are having a daughter. The treatment of choice is genetic modification, much less invasive than the previous surgical alternative. Everything is going to be fine. While they are still on sickbay, however, Tom asks the doctor to see a holographic representation of the child, recreated from the genetic data. A 24th century hollow ultrasound, if you will. Tom is awed by the image, but B'Elanna is a different story. For the next several scenes, we follow as B'Elanna seems increasingly uncomfortable about something, and we know it has something to do with the fact that the baby will have cranial ridges. Eventually, she creates a projection of what the girl will look like as a 12-year-old, including a recreation of her appearance after B'Elanna has tampered with certain sequences that would cause the cranial ridges to disappear. Sequences that, once eliminated, would make her less Klingon. She presents her modifications to the doctor under the guise that what she wants is to remove the girl's third lung, and even petitions the captain to order the doctor to perform the procedure. All the while this is happening, we see flashbacks from her childhood and understand a little about why she is so determined to change her child's appearance. There are two discussions we could have here, and the first has to do with Miral's forehead. B'Elanna is asking the doctor to perform the procedure. At first glance, it may seem very clear that what she's asking for is wrong, but there are cases in real life when this kind of thing is done. Probably the most clear example is plastic surgery for Down syndrome, for correcting the facial appearance. And this is a very complicated issue. People on one side say that this is wrong, that this is eugenic, that it legitimizes prejudice, and that it's more for the benefit of the parents than for the child. On the other side, people say that there is a clear improvement in quality of life and that it is for the benefit of the child because it improves social interaction, it makes it easier for them to deal with people in day-to-day lives. This is a very nuanced discussion, and perhaps we could do a video specifically about that, but I don't think it's worth getting in too deep right here, because the episode makes it very clear that in this case, in B'Elanna's case, this is more about her, and it's more about her dealing with her own issues about being half Klingon. There's a second discussion, however, when we consider Miral's spine and Julian's condition when he was young. Because what we're seeing here are illustrations of situations in which parents can choose to alter the DNA of a child based on a condition that they may have. And it seems that in Star Trek, they are trying to draw a line based on severity. Some things are severe enough that they warrant treatment, such as Miral's spinal defect, and other things are not severe enough, like Julian's intellectual disability. Again, this is a very complicated question, but it's profoundly important because it's a question we're grappling with right now. There are hundreds of conditions that cause intellectual disability. Sometimes patients with the same condition can have incredibly different degrees of disability, and sometimes the same degree of disability affects different families in different ways. What I'm saying is that although what Julian is describing seems to be a mild intellectual disability, it was not perceived as mild by his family. And we can see that because his mother gives a passionate speech about the pain of watching her child being left behind because his problem wasn't considered severe enough to be treated. What I'm saying is that drawing the line between what's severe enough is not necessarily obvious. But moving forward, this is something we may have to define. We are already having to grapple with these questions, right? At present, we don't have the technology to perform the kinds of extensive genetic modifications that Julian underwent. But we do know enough to be able to diagnose embryos with specific genetic disorders and choose not to implant the ones that have the disease. Broadly speaking, this is considered ethical for severe diseases. But like I'm trying to explain, in some cases it's obvious, but in other cases it may be very difficult to determine what is severe enough and who is the arbiter of severity. We don't have the answer right now. And this question is not going to go away, especially now that gene editing is a part of our reality. Another thing that complicates the matter is that genetic engineering can go wrong. The doctor touches on this when B'Elanna asks him to make the modifications. He says that the genes she wants to alter are deeply involved in too many systems, and it would be difficult to predict the outcome. Even in Star Trek, we have seen examples of how things can go wrong. In Deep Space Nine, after his secret is revealed, Starfleet enlists Julian to help in the treatment of individuals like himself. People whose genetic treatments were not successful and who are now remanded to Federation treatment facilities with a variety of psychiatric imbalances. I would suggest that because of the ban, Federation medical knowledge on genetics is bound to be limited. Perhaps trying to correct that was the reason why, by the 24th century, there was at least one science outpost dedicated to studying genomic engineering, Darwin Station, on the planet Gargarin 4. That experiment, however, also went horribly wrong. Scientists there succeeded in creating enhanced children with powerful immune systems and telepathic abilities. but their immune systems also generated aggressive antibodies that were lethal to the adults around them. Voyager's Lineage is less about the ethics of genetic engineering than about B'Elanna confronting her own struggles with her hybrid identity and her trauma about the circumstances around her father's departure. It's a little odd that the discussion on Voyager revolves around how altering the baby's DNA is ethically questionable, but the Federation's ban on genetic engineering is never mentioned. I guess we can give them a pass, seeing as how they were lost in the Delta Quadrant at the time. In any case, they never underwent the procedure. And the two final scenes, Tom and B'Elanna finally talking about her issues and her asking the doctor to be the baby's godfather, made for a great episode ending. These kinds of stories are what make Star Trek great science fiction. All of these stories about genetic engineering are not really about the technology itself. They are not about how we would be able to do these kinds of extensive modifications to a person's genome. Instead, they are about when we can do these things, how will this technology affect us. The first stories talked about the problems of doing this kind of thing. They explored the question of, is it worth seeking perfection in this way, and is perfection even achievable? They touched on two of the main fears associated with genetic augmentation. First, that we would be able to generate individuals that were superior and everybody else would become part of an underclass. Second, even if that doesn't happen, doing these kinds of modifications may strip us of our humanity in some way, like what happened with the people of Moab 4. But Star Trek doesn't stop there, because it thinks, okay, there are problems with genetic engineering, maybe it shouldn't be allowed, but then there are stories exploring the problems with that kind of solution as well, because what we see in Strange New Worlds is that by trying to avoid creating an underclass of people who are not genetically modified, they ended up creating an underclass of people who do have these modifications. And then there's of course the problem of, if we're going to use this technology for good in some way, what are the reasons that justify using it? How do we draw lines between who deserves treatment and who doesn't? Star Trek's relationship with genetic engineering is, like all of Star Trek, not really about the future. It's about us. The way Star Trek approaches these stories has less to do with the ins and outs of the science and more to do with humanity's deepest insecurities. Our obsession with perfection, our fear of becoming obsolete, our discomfort with difference. It's always personal, and it resists simple answers. Star Trek gives us Khan and the horrors of the Eugenics War, but it also gives us Una and the quiet pain of Bashir. In the end, the question is not whether we can alter the building blocks of life. It's whether we should. And as always, Star Trek's not telling us what to think. It is encouraging us to keep thinking. Thank you for watching. I'm currently working on a video about Gattaca, which will have a continuation of the discussions we started here. Meanwhile, perhaps you might enjoy my video about Freaks. That is a movie from the 1930s in which a director used actors with real disabilities and ended up creating a movie that is widely considered the most controversial movie of all time. This is it for now. Live long and prosper. If I ask you